then you shouldn't have to do anything with it. It'll just come to me.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. This is the June 4th, 2021 meeting of the Vermont Climate Council Agriculture and Ecosystem Subcommittee. Thanks for members, staff, and folks from the public who are participating today. Our agenda is up on the VCC website. As per usual, we have 2 opportunities for public comment, one scheduled at 10:50 around the midway point of our meeting, and then the other around 11:55, at which time we'll see who would like to share their thoughts, comments, and questions with the committee for a few minutes. But I'd ask the public to hold your comments until those opportunities. I'm having a little bit of technical issues with my computer again and audio, so I have to hold the microphone up to my face like this. But if anyone can't hear me at any point, please make that known. So our first agenda item is to review and approve today's agenda and the minutes from our last week's meeting. So unless anyone has any comments or questions on those, Judy, yes.
I have a comment. Last week you presented a chart, and on June 4th, you were asking me to present on TEK on that chart that you presented. I don't see that on the agenda.
So I'm sorry, I thought we were just discussing that chart last week, kind of generally, and whether folks, how and when we wanted to move ahead with those sorts of presentations. We're going to come back and finalize that schedule of presentations later today. So that was kind of just a placeholder, and I apologize, Judy, if there was any confusion about that. If you'd like to present today, we can certainly make time for that. But if not, we can, my hope is that we were going to get all the presentations finalized and scheduled at this meeting. So certainly, if you would like to do that today, we can find time. We can use our open discussion at the end of the meeting for that presentation. And if not, we can, if you don't mind and wouldn't mind going at a later date, we can finalize that scheduling today. So that was my mistake in not communicating that well to folks. So
okay, I don't mind doing it later. I just didn't want to be left off the chart if the dates were indeed the dates we were going to follow.
Great. No, I appreciate that. Thanks for flagging it. And certainly we don't want to miss hearing from you either. So we'll get that scheduled later in the meeting. So thanks for flagging that. Any other comments, questions on today's agenda or the minutes from last week? Okay, we'll consider those approved. Next item is a quick update from Jane on some elements of the Climate Council's work, staffing, etc.
I took a bite of food. I thought I had more time. Sorry. So on this agenda, this is more to reinforce our commitment to ensuring that there's sort of adequate staff support to carry you all through the process of sort of first and foremost working on your strategy development over the next 2 months, and then how we think about pulling that all together for the climate action plan in the fall. We're going to focus a lot of the conversation on Monday with the steering committee and the co-chairs around what that process will look like with respect to the templates that we envision using and the process that we envision sort of taking the subcommittee components of the work and how we plan to craft the climate action plan from that. So if you're interested in sort of that as how we discuss the process around that, I encourage you to join the steering committee meeting on Monday at 11. But for today's conversation, and just to identify and consider what support looks like specifically for your subcommittee, we've been wanting to ensure that there's consistent staff support for the subcommittees that really have a heavy lift with respect to both formatting and considering strategies, and then seeing that through the fall with respect to incorporating economic considerations as well as public engagement and how you're going to implement the strategies that you're thinking about right now. And so We're thinking about consistent staff support from a staff member for each of the subcommittees that are working at that level. So cross-sector, rural resilience, and ag and ecosystems in particular are the three committees drafting the bulk of the strategies for the climate action plan. And so my effort with respect to writing and thinking about how to vision and pull out from the templates into the climate action plan will be focused on working and supporting cross-sector. We have now hired the Global Warming Solutions Act coordinator position, and she is coming on board on June 21st, and she brings a wealth of experience in the resiliency work that will be a heavy focus of the climate action plan for both your subcommittee as well as rural resilience and adaptation. She's going to be particularly focused on staffing rural resilience and adaptation, but will also help tie a knot between your two subcommittees. And then Ali Kasiba, who is here and been with you all the way, really brings to bear the expertise around sequestration work. And so she will be the A&R person, sort of focused on helping you think about how you move into the visioning and planning and actual writing of the climate action plan and help support you in that way. And what I haven't done, because Ali clearly, and we really wanted to have an A&R person who's thinking about and has staff time to support the actual writing of the climate action plan. But I know for you all that there's a big body of work in the agricultural side of things, and Ali certainly doesn't, I mean, she has experience with that, but not the same depth of knowledge that the AAFM staff here do. So the next step, and sort of to close the loop completely on really thinking about the targeted staff, is for us to sort of have a conversation, Ali, myself, Billy, and Abby, with you, Ryan, and Judson, and Alex, others that are here, to think about how we support the work that you're bringing to the table here, and whether AAFM has a more heavy hand in helping us draft the climate action plan than perhaps other state agencies do staffing these subcommittees. So that we still want to think about that. And so, but I think it's great to have focused staff people that are here helping you all think about your work at this level. And then also CBI, Pat will be joining to facilitate a component of your agenda today, but there was overlap with another meeting, so he's not here the whole time. But CBI had a big component of their work in the contract that we have with them for facilitation was focused on facilitating public engagement. And we're not going to need them at the same level in that sphere of work as we thought we would. So we've been thinking about really shifting their hours and support to like working with subcommittees and providing subcommittee capacity all along the way, rather than just at targeted component times in your work. So Pat really will be here to help support all of you through sort of moving from one meeting to the next, to work planning. That's what he's going to talk about today. And so I'm hoping now that, like, having these targeted folks on board to support the subcommittees, it'll feel a little bit of a less heavy lift for the subcommittee members yourself. Like, you all can be freed up to really be thinking creatively about vision and strategies, and then having the support to sort of move you through the day-to-day, as well as actually drafting the climate action plan as we get to that component of the work. So hopefully that's helpful context, and I think it'll be fruitful as we start to think about other components of the work, especially recognizing that I do think those next 4 months are the heaviest lift for the subcommittee, especially if the process that we talk about with the steering committee on Monday is adopted as sort of how we move to the climate action plan.
Thanks, Jane. Any questions for Jane on that update? And I may have missed this, but did you mention where the contract with the technical service provider stood?
No, I didn't. Thank you for that. Everything takes longer than you think. I thought we had a finalized contract on Monday, but it goes back to finance and legal, and that we get more changes. So the reason I'm ducking out of 11 is to finalize the contract with the review that we got from we tipped the $500,000 mark through the revisions and to the scope of work that we made with the contractor. So we just got comments back from the AG's office from around some of the legal concerns that they had. So we're going to incorporate that and finalize the payment provisions. And so my hope is that this afternoon, right after that meeting, it will go to the preferred bidder, the contractor, to review, ensure that they're on board with all the changes that we made. We've been keeping them in the loop along the way, so I don't expect there to be any surprises, at which point, as soon as they get it back to us, it'll be routed for signature. So our hope is by the end of next week, which is what our finance director has been telling me seems reasonable, that they'll be on board.
Great, thank you. Okay, all good news. More bodies available to help us do our work, keep us organized, provide some structure to our conversations, and free us up to dig into the more substantive issues. So thanks, Jane. Okay, moving on. Brief updates from the task groups. Let's see. Ryan, would you like to go first this week?
Absolutely, happy to. Subtask group 5C met yesterday morning. We started our discussion looking at the timeline that was proposed the previous week and look to build how we're going to meet the proposed timeline. I believe it seemed doable, but we then began looking at the matrix that is a way to catalog recommendations in preparation for our discussion today, of course, and that led us into a broad discussion on how to conceptualize and place strategies and looking at these higher level buckets, and then discussions around specific practices, programs that can be used to implement new or expansion of existing programs to meet the emission reduction requirements. So that was a very robust discussion. There's the charge for next week is to return to the working group process so we can begin to solidify these themes and buckets into a concrete proposal of sorts. Everything on the table, and then we'll kind of vet our way through MCA and other ranking or vetting it as suggested on the timeline. So I think we're making good progress and starting at the very fine details of how do we actually get these emission reductions from agriculture and translating that to new and innovative strategies, and also some core concepts that the group is going to want to elevate around agricultural lands as a framework, and then how existing programs can support additional implementation. So kind of a rambling response, but I think we're having a good discussion, and the timeline that was proposed seems ambitious, but we'll strive to meet that.
Super.
And welcome any thoughts from the rest of the group.
Thanks, Ryan. Any other thoughts from that group? Okay. Oh, Mr. Mears.
Yeah, thanks. You just saved me. I was just typing something in the chat, which was going to be inarticulate. So I was just going to add a topic that has come up in some conversations in the Ag Task Group and in the Forest Task Group that I wonder if we might reserve time for in the open discussion, is the degree to which the task groups address the topics of keeping strategies to keep forests as forests or keeping farms as farms, because they start to get into a set of issues around, the economic viability of those business sectors and a set of more economic related recommendations. I personally would like to do that, but I think it's something we should, as a group, talk about to be sure we're clear on, and that each task group is approaching it in the same way.
Thanks, David. I think that makes sense. I think one of the things I'd like to come back in that discussion later is kind of for whether our subcommittee as a whole and the task groups individually want to kind of clearly articulate their vision or kind of goals for their work and in the development of the strategies. And that may be a place to discuss how and if we integrate those economic considerations. So thanks for that. Any other thoughts from that group? Great. Abby, how about your group?
I sheepishly have nothing to report. I've been a bit knocked off my game this week. So we will plan to regroup and have something to report next week. That's all I got.
Okay. Thanks. I'll take that opportunity to give a report from the Forest Working and Natural Lands task group. We do kind of an every other week meeting. So we'll get together next Tuesday morning. Our initial kind of suite of draft recommendations is starting to take shape. I met with some A&R staff earlier this week to kind of talk about how we move that into a more organized and comprehensive list. So we're going to do some work in the background in advance of our next meeting. I plan today or Monday to send out to the group kind of a proposed schedule for the next, for the rest of the month, basically, and how we're going to use our time to meet our obligations under the proposed timeline for the subcommittee. So I think things are coming together well, and these kind of more meta questions that David alluded to are starting to bubble up to the surface. So hopefully we'll have good opportunities to work through those in the coming weeks. Iris, would you be willing to give us an update from Just Transitions?
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I actually wasn't able to make it to the meeting last night, but Abby Willard is here, and I would invite her to give an update, as well as if you have anything to add, Jane. Sorry about that.
No problem. Thanks, Abby.
Hi, everyone. I'm Abby Willard. I also work at the Agency of Agriculture in the Ag Development Division and in staff support for the Just Transition Subcommittee. So happy to stand in for Iris here with a little bit of an update on the efforts from the Just Transition Subcommittee. So we now have some final draft guiding principles that will be shared by the co-chairs of the Just Transition Subcommittee with the Climate Council Steering Committee next week. So I believe on Monday. Following that conversation, which would be focused on the process that we've identified, or the steering committee has identified, of how to share materials. The plan is that on June 17th, probably between 4 and 5 p.m., there would be a workshop available to steering committee and other subcommittee members to attend this session, to be presented with the guiding principles that were developed by the steering committee, as well as an evaluating and scoring rubric that's being proposed as a way for subcommittees to consider the different strategies and recommendations being proposed to ensure that they take into consideration some of the just transition perspectives. That would then be presented during that workshop with an opportunity for question and answers from both steering committee and subcommittee members. I think at that point, then making it publicly available. So there will be a presentation of the materials to the steering committee, and therefore I think the materials would be available to this subcommittee in advance of the workshop on the 17th, but that 17th is an opportunity for you to ask questions, get better guidance from kind of the thinking and the thought process that the steering committee, that the Just Transition Subcommittee has taken over the past few months in putting together these guiding principles. And then the concept is that Iris or myself and others, Jane certainly, would be available to this subcommittee to offer kind of ongoing liaison support if there's implementation questions and conversations around how the Just Transition recommendations fit into the work that this committee is doing, and the suggestions that may come out of this team to the Climate Council. Jane, did I sufficiently kind of cover that?
Yeah, you did a great job. And just one follow-up is that just note that this idea of a workshop is in lieu of the roadshow. So I think originally what's been sort of communicated is that Just Transitions would have time on your agendas to go through their thought process and everything that Abby just laid out for the guiding principles document. But it was becoming sort of complicated to think about how that would work for Just Transition staff to support that. And so the idea now is that they will host a workshop that subcommittees will be largely, I don't want to say it's mandatory, but it will be the chance to really walk through it with Just Transitions. So, and you guys may end up wanting to do two. That's not quite clear yet, but the expectation is for subcommittee members to join that workshop.
Thanks. Judy asked if you have a time on the 17th, and I just add to that. Okay, 4 to 5. Okay, yeah. If that could get out on calendars as quickly as possible, that would be great. And we're gonna have a subcommittee meeting the following day on June 18th. And maybe if Iris is willing, she could kind of reprise that presentation a bit for us on the 18th for anyone who couldn't make the 17th, and give us an opportunity to discuss the principles as a group. So that's something we can talk about later. Great.
Billy, can I just add one additional thing? So the concept behind the workshop is that it will also be recorded, so that if folks are not able to make that date and time, they can watch the recording. Part of the rationale around not doing the roadshow was trying to figure out how to have multiple subject matter experts to be able to encapsulate the thinking and the processing, and be as inclusive as the co-chairs may be able to be during this one workshop session. So even if folks are not able to attend, they'll absolutely be able to watch the recording. And I think that Iris and I would be happy to kind of field any questions, even if that means we encourage you to watch the recording if you weren't able to participate.
Sounds like a good and fair approach. Thank you. Any questions for Abby, Iris, or Jane on that? Okay. Lauren, are you with us today?
She had thought potentially she could call in at some point, but she is away today.
Okay, I wasn't sure if some of these phone numbers was her or not. So does anyone else care to give an update from the resilience group?
So I will venture into that, but I'm totally unprepared, Billy, because I wasn't expecting this. So now it'll be Judy and Allie will be able to see if I was paying attention. So we have interesting discussions. And the main sort of, I guess, idea that need to pass on was some concern over the use or not use of the MCA process. Lauren and others were concerned that we make sure that we do a full criteria analysis of natural solutions. We do get into interesting discussions about things like Japanese knotweed and that sort of thing. But I mean, I really will rely on Judy and Allie to add anything if they've got anything that they want to add.
Yeah,
Jake was there too. Sorry, Jake.
Yeah. It's all right. It's all right. I didn't want to actually step in. What you said about the MCA brought up something that we were talking about. So sort of piggyback on what you said, John. I think there's this question of just some transparency of the work that's happening in the task groups, and what each task group puts through the MCA, and then kind of what makes it through and then gets presented to the subcommittee as a whole. So one of the questions was whether or not, you know, each member of the subcommittee would be able to see the full suite of strategies that have been reviewed by each of the task groups through their MCA process, or if we're just going to be seeing basically what sort of each group's priority recommendations are that make it through that, make it through the MCA tool, assuming that each task group is using the MCA tool to kind of prioritize and submit recommendations. And one of the, you know, I think one of the questions just about that was, you know, while we certainly trust the expertise and abilities of everyone that's doing this task work, you know, just kind of wanting to see maybe and perhaps advocate for something that didn't make it through, that people might have, you know, knowledge about, or be able to advocate in a certain way about something that would change people's opinions, but that they weren't a part of that task group's sort of process. And so just, yeah, I think there's just questions of like how much of that content will be available to each subcommittee member. You know, will we be seeing that full suite of things that got reviewed, or just basically be seeing a set of priority recommendations that come out of each task group?
Thanks for raising that, Jake and John. And, you know, I've been having similar thoughts around like both the participation of the broader group and then just efficiency. And I think we're going to get into this when we talk with Pat later around our work plan, and kind of like when the initial recommendations from the task groups are shared with the broader group and when the MCA analysis is done. You know, I think there's inevitably going to be strategies and recommendations coming out of different task groups that are similar, if not exactly the same, right? Like land conservation is going to be a theme, presumably, of a number of these groups. So, you know, what's the, you know, how and when do we kind of share, reconcile, consolidate, and then kind of, you know, put the further analysis in the hands of one group rather than three, just from a kind of an efficiency perspective? And yeah, like how raw do we want the recommendations to be, or how filtered before they come to the whole group? So I think that is going to be certainly part of what we get into with John, actually with Pat later today. And I see Alyssa, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I just I really appreciate that we'll get into more depth about what detail we'll share in this bigger group. I just wanted to share that I did have a brief conversation with Lauren, and David was there as well, about just discussing when we should be using the MCA tool. And the three of us, I think our agreement was that it should be used as early as possible. It's intended to make sure that we're considering all of those things as early on in our recommendations as possible, and then it's not at the end. And so at the task group level and the level of strategy development seems like the right place to start. And then we thought we could flag maybe key issues or challenges or ideas that came up during the MCA review and share those with the bigger group as needed, but that it might be efficient and worthwhile to kind of record that process early on. And I just, because Lauren's not here, I just wanted to share that we had that conversation.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think that makes good sense and stuff we should talk about later. Judy, please go ahead.
Our conversation also included what if we had on our list things that perhaps we thought another committee might address. And so that coming together seemed important because we didn't want things to fall through the cracks, assuming another committee was covering something, and we didn't.
Thanks, Judy. Great point. Okay. Anything else from the task groups? Good. Well, I think a lot of these updates queue us up well for some conversation later today. Okay, so moving on, we're a little bit behind schedule here, but that's okay. I think Jane is going to lead us through kind of a review and finalization of the strategies template, which is the document that was shared last time that kind of frames out how we're gonna the vessel to carry our recommendations up to the Climate Council. I tried to share a draft with that of all of you earlier in the week, and I think Jane, you probably have a more dynamic version that maybe you could kind of put up and walk us through. And I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So I shared the Excel spreadsheet with Abby and Billy, and then I just want to comment on it. It was when it gets formatted and linked on the website, especially the Excel documents just don't format that well. So maybe in the future, Billy and Abby, just as we share things like that, it's probably better to actually share that, like the Excel doc rather than the PDF link from the website, because it gets all funny. Anyway, I'll just say that. So yes, we looked at this last week as a group, and then I shared it with you all, and my apologies for not having it prepared to share it with you before last Friday, but then I shared it with you all after the meeting and received feedback from some of you to address in the spreadsheet. At the same time, that process was playing out in cross-sector mitigation and rural resilience. So I say that and set the stage because we're trying to be mindful of having, templates that align and speak to each other, recognizing that there are different metrics and language for each of those three subcommittees to consider. But as we think about finalizing this today and in practice, because I really think this is all really a working draft, and the best thing to do as we sort of come to consensus around a somewhat final draft is for you all, especially within your task leads, to start using it within your task groups and populating it and figuring out what works and doesn't work. I also want to set the stage and share with you that this policy template is clunky and it's long, and some people like Excel documents and some people like Word, some people like PowerPoint. Not all of us work the same way. So it's one of a few templates and tools that'll be coming for us to think about how we pull together the climate action plan. And for July, the spreadsheet is the first of the templates that you'll be expected to use, the second being a slide deck. And I'm going to show you today after we talk, if there's 5 minutes, we're going to talk about on Monday our thinking around a slide deck. And I've been looking a lot at the way Maine put out their strategies. And I want to show it to you at the same time as we look at the Excel spreadsheet, because what you'll see is that is going to be the way we communicate your strategies for public engagement over the summer. And you'll see how little sort of comes out of that very cumbersome spreadsheet to get built up into the policy, into the slide deck, so that I think you'll be able to sort of get a sense of how far you need to take the strategy spreadsheet at this point in time. You don't have to fill it out to the nth degree of detail. It's really about getting at your major strategies that are coming out of your subcommittee, which I expect are going to be 3 to 10 strategies, right? And then all of your recommendations and detail are going to fall under those big buckets of work. And that's what we're going to want to test this summer. And I have open the slide presentation from Maine's Natural and Working Lands Work Group to show you. So let me share screen. So I hopefully everybody's seeing. Oh wait, my screen froze. Hopefully everybody's seeing this. So not everything is filled out here still, and I also will walk you through it quickly, but also know that this is a lot to digest in this kind of a format. So again, broad brush comments at this point would be great, and I really do encourage task groups to sort of get into this and think about revisions at that level that we can still accommodate where appropriate. So some of the big changes here, you have your what we're calling primary tasks for you all, because a consistent theme from the comments that I heard were that many of your task groups will have overlap. So just because you're working on a resiliency task doesn't mean it won't also have benefit with respect to natural lands solutions. So it's really to identify where that task is originating from, and at some point we'll probably want to think about how we bucket this work together. The additions here of the goals for 2025, 30, and 50 carry over from in cross-sector. They have clear statutory requirements that they need to hit for 2025, 30, and 50. You could argue, and I know we've talked about this at the subcommittee before, that your subcommittee has a metric, right, that is identified in the Global Warming Solutions Act, but it's not extremely meaningful, right? The net zero by 2050 for sequestration, if we hit our 2030 statutory requirement for emissions reductions, then we'll be net zero at 2030. So to say that we need to be net zero by 2050 is somewhat of a meaningless recommendation or requirement, because I suspect and would argue that most of you will feel this way too, that we're going to want to do more, because really what it would mean is we could stop, like, not worry about conserving forests or enhancing soil or, you know, enhancing agricultural practices, and we could actually lose the benefit of some of those resources and still meet our 2050 requirements. So this here around a goal for 2025, a goal for 30 and 50, to me gets at something that the subcommittee hasn't done yet, which is a visioning exercise of, like, what are you striving for? Are you striving for net zero at 2030 and then beyond for 2050? What's success look like from an ag and ecosystems perspective? And I think that we'll be able to translate then into these intermediate goals that we can set sort of in line with the way we have them for the emissions requirements. And this gets at another goal that I suspect or hope will come out of the Climate Action Plan, which I know Lauren speaks to a lot and all of you feel, but is equal play and equal consideration for the three buckets of work for the Climate Action Plan. So thinking about resiliency, sequestration, and emissions requirements as all equally important as our climate policy for the state of Vermont. Again, right now, because of the way the law is written, it is focused on emissions reductions, that I think that an emerging strategy that I hope will come out of at the Climate Council level is a recognition that all of this work is equally important, and how do we get to that? So you setting goals and requirements there, I think, will be really important. Strategy for you all, we'll get here for here it's a general description, and then whether it's ready to implement and the estimated timeline, as well as factors and barriers for implementation. So in my mind, this first general description and prioritizing of these strategies is what you need to really get to for the July deliverable. All this other component, which for you all will be important to you, because I suspect the MCA tool will help figure out what those key strategies are. This stuff won't really be presented with respect to how we communicate with the public, except for the way we tell the overarching story of why these strategies are important. So again, here we have, sorry, it's bouncing all over, the priority and impact. And at this point, it's really about being qualitative, but where possible, being as quantitative as possible. So this is where you get into the MCA tool, somehow describing the potential that the strategy has to create resiliency or sequestration on a landscape. If there are measurable things that you can put in there, that's great. Otherwise, speaking to the magnitude of the strategy. Here, we're going to think about this as you as we unveil the principles and equity assessment components, which is a scoring rubric that Just Transitions is working on. And then speaking to the other benefits that the strategies get at with respect to implementation on the ground. And the feasibility, thank you to Judson for sending me the IPCCs. I will add that in now that Judson has sent that to me. And this was a really great comment that Lauren had, and others have spoken to this in her comments to me on the last draft. But, you know, we so regularly focus on what is this going to cost, but especially with respect to sequestration and resiliency, speaking to the cost of inaction. So, you know, if we cut all of our forests down, obviously that's a big, and don't work on conservation, that's a huge cost in that way. And then finally, speaking to implementation, that whether it's a state-led initiative, a private sector initiative, speaking about who is advancing the work and who the key stakeholders are. So this is your spreadsheet here aligns really closely with rural resiliences, and then again has a lot of overlap with the cross sector, but is a bit obviously more qualitative than quantitative. Go ahead, Charlie. I'm all done.
Thanks, Jane. I just wanted to clarify because there was another template or another template spreadsheet floating around that was titled VCC recommendations template, and it looks like that was rolled together with the one titled Ag and Ecosystem Strategies template. So I just want to make sure like we're now looking at one and there's not another one out there as well.
Yes.
Just keeping my template straight. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. So originally, just for nuance, I had it all as the VCC templates, and then there were tabs for cross-sector ag and ecosystems and rural resilience. But recognizing folks were like editing, it just felt cleaner to separate them. And then again, for you all, we tried to create consistency with your earlier prioritization spreadsheet that you developed as you were working on your MCA tool, but then also bring in the components that we were using for other subcommittees too. So this is the Ag and Ecosystems one, the one and only.
Thank you.
So I'm happy to field comments at this point. Go ahead, Alyssa.
Thanks, Jane. I think it looks like there's a place for most things in there. And just looking at it right now, I feel like there's one thing that I don't see a place for, and that is unintended consequences or trade-offs. And maybe they fit into the cost of inaction, but I'm thinking about things like, you know, if we reduce emissions from agriculture by reducing farms or some types of agriculture in the state, we reduce the emissions maybe from cows here in Vermont, but that doesn't mean those emissions don't happen. They just happen outside the sphere of Vermont. And so, you know, that maybe they're in someone else's backyard. And so I feel like there are other types of consequences and unintended things that we maybe just, it would be great to be able to note them in this document, even if it's not in detail. I see that the narrative could be a place, but I just wonder where you think that would fit in.
Mm-hmm. That's a great comment. And I will say Iris actually, to her credit, has consistently brought that up as a component of the Just Transitions like guiding principles, thinking about those trade-offs when we're focused on Vermont and pushing those consequences elsewhere. So it is in that document, and it's also in the questions or sort of assessment questions, but it's not, you're right, it's not, those are important enough that there probably should be a spot where we actually can, if we can name it, what we're doing, call it out and name it. And I like I do feel like it fits in cost of inaction, but you're right, it's different. And so I've made note and I can think a little bit about that, but if you have if it's not just simply another column, if it can fit in somewhere else or anybody has ideas about that, let me.
Thanks, Jane.
Go ahead, Pat.
Jane, just I think partly to help the task groups as they think about what level of detail they need to carry on their work for July. So just to kind of name like the level of detail of a potential goal and strategy or strategies, and tell me, I'm going to give you an example, but I want to see if this is right. So would a goal be something like accelerate carbon storage in Vermont's soils and forests as a goal? And the strategy might be, conserve more forest land, create a carbon payment program, et cetera, et cetera. What kind of level of detail are you expecting from the subcommittees and the task groups kind of for July?
I'm going to stop sharing. And I know, Pat, you're like teeing me up after I just heard about your conversation yesterday with other CBI staff around definitions. Hold on, let me just, so this has not been modified to Vermont yet. Let me see. Here it is. This was the slide deck that was used for Maine, and I think we're going to adapt to this and use something very similar for Vermont. We're going to talk about this in concept as a template on Monday with the steering committee, but it really is a like 1 to 2 slides on oh, this is a PDF, so it's not going on who we are, and then it gets at the process that you briefly speak to on how you developed your strategies. But let me get to what's important about the work. I want to show you the strategies component. Okay, so this is it. They had five strategies that came out of natural and working lands. And then they're broad, very broad. And then from here, you would have many goals and like measurable components underneath or objectives, whatever you're right. Pat's identifying an issue that we are starting to talk about, but ensuring that we have consistent language as we scale down from a strategy. But this is really, I think, like you're going to fill out your spreadsheets, and your spreadsheets are going to probably have way more data than all of this for by the summertime. But the way we're going to have to actually sum it up, and what you all as a subcommittee are going to be working to sort of bring up and bring into a presentation for the engagement component to happen in August and September is what are your 5 or 6 or whatever it is, big strategies for ag and ecosystems. And then from there, you'll, in the fall, you'll be thinking about the how. Like you'll be hearing from the public, you'll be hearing about economics, and you'll be sort of structuring the programs and initiatives that are needed in order to enable these strategies in practice to go on the ground. So I'm kind of hoping that by seeing this template that will be, I expect that after Monday's meeting, I hope that we'll have guidance and agreement on what we're striving for a communication tool around the work coming out of the subcommittees. And then within, 1 to 2 weeks that you'll have these, so you'll understand what you're trying to get it all formatted up to for the summertime communication work. But hopefully this gives a little bit of relief in a way to think about what you need to get to, although it is also daunting at the same time to think about the big buckets of work.
Thank you, Jane. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jane. I just want to jump in here because I know that this has come up in our group. I know Marley shared some comments about like how we structure these recommendations. This is the first time I've appreciated that what you're looking for in July is as kind of high level as what you just showed. That's fine. I think personally speaking, I feel like we still need to get to a much more granular level over the course of the next couple of weeks to move this process forward. So while what we might share with the council in July is kind of top line recommendations, I do think we're going to need to kind of dig into the details. So, to kind of answer Alyssa's question or comment, it seems like there should be like top level kind of strategies or goals on that template, and then an ability to populate the more specific strategies, because if we're going to be using this tool, we might as well use it starting now for that more granular work.
I completely agree.
Also think
I suspect you will share that template also with the council in July. as far as you've gotten with it. And you're right, just to stay the course. There's no way you have to get to that granularity in July. I just wanted you to see how I expect that we would communicate it with the public as well, because you have to be thinking sort of at both levels. Go ahead, Abby. Sorry.
I think that's really helpful framing, and we sort of noticed this. Ryan, David, Alyssa, John can back me up on, but we sort of noticed this, I think, yesterday when we were in ag emissions, is that it was almost that going to the level of granularity has started to really clarify where the broader buckets and strategies exist, but it was almost like going into the granularity really helped define that even better. So I think Billy's right that it's very helpful to know that July can be that high level. And also I think a certain amount of digging into the granularity can really help clarify how we want that high level to manifest.
Agreed. Okay. I think that's a really helpful clarification that, where we're heading at level of detail for the end of next month, and then kind of where we're ultimately going to land, and how we capture both of those scales in that document going forward is going to be important. Anything else folks want to discuss, questions, suggestions on this topic?
Can I just add, I really like knowing that what we need to deliver in a month's time or so is really high level goals, and that I think takes a little pressure off. But I just want to acknowledge that I think the momentum is kind of picking up and getting into the details of what the work that needs to be done in Vermont is. And I really hope that our groups don't lose that momentum or keep track of the specific strategies and programs that we're getting into, because I think that's really valuable work.
Absolutely. All right, other thoughts or comments from the subcommittee or staff on this topic? All right, super. So that brings us to, I believe, our first opportunity for public comment this morning. We're just about right on time. If members of the public could, who are interested in speaking briefly right now, could raise your hand in Zoom or otherwise announce your interest, please do so. I see Jennifer. Any other takers right now? There will be another opportunity later. Okay, Jennifer, it looks like you are going to be it for right now. If you could take a couple minutes to share your thoughts with the group, that would be great.
Thank you. And thanks for all this great conversation here. I just wanted to echo a couple of things that subcommittee and committee members have said, maybe starting with Alyssa's excitement about the specifics of some of the strategies. I think that'll be really exciting going forward, thinking about what it is we can do. And the specific strategies. And then going back sort of to a comment that Jake made and Judy made about those strategies that might not make it all the way through. I think particularly for the public, that'll be exciting to see, because certainly the public will have ideas that don't make it all the way through, and to see them potentially mirrored by the subcommittee, I think will be a great thing. So to the extent that those can be made public, I think that would be great. And Judy's point about the intersecting and potentially overlapping strategies that both come out of the task leads and different subcommittees, I think will be an important thing, because they'll only be strengthened by those intersections. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Jennifer, for those comments. Any other members of the public like to chime in right now, or any kind of questions or response from the subcommittee? Charlie.
Thanks, Billy. I just had a question regarding written comment that comes in. I know like CLF has sent some stuff in, and I imagine other things have come in either by email or through the portal on the website. And I just didn't know, is there a, I apologize if I missed it, but is there a place that subcommittee members can go to like look at that and read it? Or a process for review, I guess, other than kind of just acknowledging receipt and then kind of what happens.
Right. I was going to actually ask that of Jane, because I think we're starting to compile both external comments and, our members are just dropping stuff into the chat and emailing things around. And I think we should probably have a structure and maybe some staff support to compile and make that stuff available.
Thanks.
Yeah, there is not a process right now. Or I'm going to drop in the chat the link so you can review the public comments. They come in, I get them, I have to look at them and verify that they're legit, and then I just approve, and it moves from me onto a public site where anybody can go in and look at all the public comments received. It's on the to-do list of the coordinator when they get on board to sort of think about a process and starting to communicate that out. And perhaps they can then use staff support in the subcommittees themselves to think about how we're compiling all the public comments we're receiving. But right now it hasn't been thoughtfully organized yet.
Okay. Everyone ready to move on? That's a great question though, Charlie. I was thinking the same thing. So we'll try to get that dialed in. All right, so Pat is back with us, and sounds like, fortunately, you're going to hopefully be with us more often as we move through the next month or so, which is greatly appreciated. And you had kind of presented to us last time a conceptual work plan for the subcommittee to get through the next couple months to get to that July 26th deadline. And I think you've solicited comments. You may have received some from this group, and you're going to kind of run through an updated version, and then hopefully we can lock in whatever we've wind up with today as our final plan to move forward with.
Great. Let me share my screen. There's not been a lot of changes to this, but there's been one change that I think Billy wisely pointed out. Can people see that okay? And this is, I think it gets to Alyssa and Abby's comment about details. So I think my understanding is that you all do want to get into some detail in your task groups, that you want to be able to use the MCA and the equity screen, at least a first blush, by the time you kind of put forward your recommendations to the full council in July. So in order to do that,
could I just jump in real quick, Pat?
Yeah,
before you joined us this morning, as we were giving report outs from our task groups, we had a pretty good conversation about, when to filter the strategies, at what level through the MCA, at what level task group, full subcommittee, how to make sure that the full subcommittee was aware of all the strategies, kind of whether they made it through that filter or not, and not tension, but just some questions about like, what's the right level of effort when, who does it? So, and avoiding kind of duplicating effort. So I think we kind of teed up this conversation already for you.
Awesome. So let me state what I think we would propose, but then we can also change this and want to make sure you all feel it's doable. So Billy, thanks a lot for that. So in looking at this plan, we didn't get a lot of changes to the subcommittee with the task group work. You guys are working away, but what we realized is, to Billy's point, is we kind of need to kind of see the universe of ideas that are developing in this month, so that we make sure that if one of them needs to go to one task group versus another, so two task groups aren't kind of trying to kind of run the MCA or equity analysis through, the same thing. For efficiency, we need to kind of get a first blush on what you're coming up with, right? And it also helps the group see the whole as well. So our thought is, and we need to talk about whether this is actually doable, is the task groups we need to bring to the full subcommittee here, essentially June 18th, which is 2 weeks. Here's our kind of like no detail whatsoever. Here's our kind of 8, 10 things we're looking at, whatever. Let's look at them together. Interesting. Okay, geez, task group, maybe task group Y, you should take this one. We won't take that one. And the reason to do that so early is so then if you do want to do further filtering, MCA analysis, we'll do that in a way that's efficient and we're not redundant, right? So that's a kind of a bit of a change from last week. This is pretty intensive, right? In 2 weeks, kind of coming up with that at least initial sense of what everyone's going to be working on so we can look at it collectively. You'll go back to your groups, do your analysis. Again, make sure, yeah, I think as Billy said, we need to talk more about making sure people understand what's being left behind and why, for instance. And then starting really in after, just before the 4th, we think probably the Ag GHG group first, and then shortly thereafter, the other groups are then bringing forward these more refined or vetted or sort of screened strategies or recommendations for your all's consideration, which you'll be doing, really in bits and pieces in July 2nd and July 9th. And then on the 16th, you're kind of trying to put those all together in a package. And then essentially on July 23rd, you've got a final Friday to make sure you've got it together in the slide format they want you to have it in, that you can forward to the council. So pretty tight. So I think we just want to have some discussion to make sure this is actually achievable, and any questions about it too. But
Thanks, Pat. And I don't want to hog the mic here, but I guess my mind, frankly, is still a little bit blown from Jane's earlier presentation and the kind of expectations around the level of detail that goes to the council the end of next month. Those are pretty high level strategies. And if that's really what we're looking at, I feel like that's something we can kind of, the task groups can probably report out pretty quickly on. So I don't know if we want to just confirm that that's really the way we're going here, and then take it from there.
I wanted to come back to Ellis and Abby's point and have the group discuss, because I think there's something to be said for as much as you can get into the details now and a fair amount of the weeds. And then as you start to figure out what you're going to put forward to the council, you can roll it back up into buckets. To Abby's point, that sometimes by doing the details, you actually think about the buckets differently. But I think people should talk about this now to think about that for sure.
Judy.
Yeah, great.
Patrick, could you explain to me why you have equity and TEK as a separate thing? Equity and TEK should be at every level. Discussed at every level.
Absolutely. So on the TEK, it's there to make sure we didn't lose it. It maybe should be in every box and in every place. So we should talk about that, Judy. And then on equity, it was mostly trying to figure out when we do the equity screen, you need to be talking about it all along. And then when you actually use the equity screening tool, we're sensing you need to do that sort of simultaneously with the MCA tool. So we want to make sure that was clear, that you have kind of two tools you got to work with. But the TK, kind of a placeholder, we maybe need to do better than we did.
Exactly. It should never be seen as a box to be checked off as we talked about it. It should be incorporated into every topic.
Let's see other comments. Let's think about how to incorporate that into this work plan better. So excellent point.
Thank you.
Alyssa, did you have your hand up, I think?
Yeah, it's just a small comment. I just wanted to agree with Billy. I appreciate the reduce in stress of what we need to deliver in July, but I am a little concerned that the level of recommendations that we saw in that main presentation are potentially too vague to really address all of the kinds of considerations that we've been asked to do and are trying to do. And I wonder what other members feel about that.
Well, I know that, Gedakina, the organization I work for, we have 5 groups in Maine. So I'm familiar with a lot of what's happening in Maine. And I know the state has been giving hundreds of thousands of acres of land, woodland, back to the tribes to manage. And that's something that they considered in everything they did. And I'm not sure you can make that same consideration here because we do not have federally recognized tribes. But that greatly impacts, I mean, to give away several 100,000 acres of woodland to be cared for through TEK makes a big difference.
Yeah, that's exciting. I just didn't see it in the level of recommendations in that little presentation that Jane shared. And so it'd be great if we could bring that specific recommendation to the table, as well as others that are kind of at that level, which seems one step down from what was shared in that main presentation. But Cool.
So I think and part of this is like trying to figure out what you all are expected to produce at what level. And I think we definitely, let's talk about that a little bit more so where people are clear what they're going to kind of come back with at various points. David, you had your hand up?
Yeah.
I was just gonna, I don't want this to sound too harsh, but I'm actually feeling kind of harsh about the idea that we would stay high level. The amount of time and effort that all of us have put into this and the number of hours of staff time, I'll be embarrassed if all we put forward is a set of platitudes. We have to go well beyond, that high level set of recommendations. I don't know what the Climate Council itself at the higher level isn't going to do that work. They don't have the time or capacity. So if we don't force ourselves to get into more detail between now and July 20 something, then we'll have missed an important opportunity to influence where this where this work lands, and we'll have wasted the past, how many months have we been spent kind of building up to get to this place? I don't have time to keep messing around if all we're going to agree on is 5 high-level recommendations that include things like we need to protect forests. We know that. Like, how are we going to protect them? What are the specific policies, and how many forests, and how many acres? And so I hope we go well beyond the idea of kind of high-level strategies.
Yeah, I agree, David. And I think that we can kind of, as long as we've got kind of consensus here, we can kind of agree as a group that we will continue on our path to be more specific. And I think we can have some ongoing conversations with Jane around what's actually going to happen in July. There may be some consideration that what goes out for that initial public input is not so baked that it doesn't give the opportunity for the public to kind of influence the directive nature of our strategies. So kind of stay high level to allow the public to influence that kind of high level direction. But even if that's ultimately how we go out for public engagement, I think our work needs to continue at that kind of granular level because we just don't have the time to wait for that.
So a question as we did the CBI team talk yesterday, and we talked a little bit to Jane too, but David, to your point and others, I think if each of the task groups can figure out whatever your what's are, like, and again, I'm going to use an example, just and someone else use a better one. If one of the what's is we're going to better sequester carbon in our forests and soils, there's a whole set of how you would do that, right? A number of very specific recommendations, because that is kind of meaningless without the recommendations. And we're hoping you can do the how. You may not agree to all the hows yet. You may not have analyzed all the hows yet. You may be missing a how. We will get in public comment, but you have, I don't know, 10 hows how to achieve that what, and you may have more than one what in each of your task groups. And we hope you can get there by July. Who does it, exactly how much it's going to cost, the details of what regulations need to change in 2022, those are for the fall, but definitely the what and the hows with some detail, I think needs to go forward this summer, if that helps.
Yeah, I think that's much more aligned with what we've been thinking and not exactly what Maine presented. So thanks, Pat, for that.
And I want to just check with the task groups because we are kind of asking you to come back with some of the what's and hows in a few weeks, and then you'll have more time to continue to vet them. But I want to make sure for the task groups you feel that's doable, because we do want to kind of look at what's piling up so you can look at them together early so we don't end up with redundancies or conflicts, 3 weeks later. Does that feel doable?
I think so. Could you just maybe throw that, if others want to discuss, please jump in. But before we move on from this, if you could just throw that work plan up one more time on the screen, just so we could just check back in on those milestones, I think that would be helpful for me.
But Judy, I added a kind of cross-cutting or integrated throughout TK equity and co-benefits, I guess, across the whole top. So it's all the way through. Judy, to your good point you made. It may not be quite right, but hopefully it's better.
Thank you.
Okay, so, and could you show us where, so it's July 18th or June 18th when we're going to bring at least some level of recommendations back to the whole group.
Exactly. And that's just to kind of, again, you haven't screened them yet. You may have even talked about them not much, but kind of the list of possibilities that you can kind of lump together to see who's doing what, if you need to kind of reassign to a task group so you're not two groups doing the same thing, for instance. And then the thought is, 25th and July 2nd, those task groups are further refining those. You're starting to use the MCA and equity screen to go through those. And because we think the Ag GHG group is a little further ahead, they would be the first out of the chute on July 2nd to say, here's our more refined what's and how's given, and here's what we did in our screening to kind of what we identified some things, and let the work group as a whole discuss those. And then on July 9th, or you may need a longer meeting, by the way, then the other task groups are bringing forward those. Same thing, you're kind of dumping on the subcommittee all of the stuff and the screening and where things are, and you have a robust discussion. And then July 16th, you have a chance to kind of absorb that together one more time. Think about how you want to package it. If you don't want to put something forward or do, this is where you're starting to get into more deliberation and even decision. And then on July 23rd, sorry, you can't see that, just before these things are due, that's Sunday, the 25th, you'll have to decide what you're going to forward to the full council. So that'll be kind of a key decision point for the subcommittee to come to consensus on what you're forwarding to the Climate Council for further public comment.
Great.
Okay.
Thoughts, comments, questions?
No one's taking vacation, right? That was a joke. It's ambitious. So I think, Alyssa, were you going to comment?
No, I just appreciate the reminder to factor in vacation into the schedule, which I hadn't thought about, but I've got a couple in there in July. I had a brief comment. I put it in the chat. At the top of your screen, or the top of this sheet, which we can't see, the carbon budget is a task group that hasn't even gotten to that piece that we intended to do on the 28th of May. And so, yeah, just wanted to suggest that be revised.
Yeah, this one I felt like I knew least about, so it may be completely off in terms of order or sequence. So if maybe Billy, you can give me some suggested changes and we can change it, because I wasn't sure for sure. Great. Any other quick reactions? Otherwise, I'll turn it back to Billy. Great. Good comment. Thanks. I'll save this and we'll get it back out to all of you soon.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. So now we're actually moving on to, I believe, an agenda item looking at, when and who we're going to hear from as far as outside experts to help inform our work, knowing that a number of entities have stepped forward with an offer. And I think this dovetails well into the conversation we just had. And, Pat, maybe you can kind of help us continue to work through this. I'll put this up on my screen. Let's see, as a talking point. Let's see. Okay, let me know if you can see that.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, so Judy, again, apologies for any confusion that the earlier draft indicated, but this is something we looked at a little bit last week. I've made a couple little updates since the dates were past due. And, I think that first column is the kind of topical areas that we've discussed, wanting to get some further input on some potential dates, and in the notes section, kind of who might be involved in providing that information. And then the last column is, do we do this as a segment of our normal meetings, or do we do them as a kind of additional longer dive with other relevant Climate Council subcommittees, kind of a lunch sort of brown bag session. So this is kind of a straw person proposal for right now. I think we heard earlier from Just Transitions that there's going to be the session on the 17th of June that we'll be invited to, and that we might want to hold a little time on the 18th for them to kind of follow up with any additional conversations specific to our work. But otherwise, would just love input from you all on what this looks like, who you want to hear from, and when. This is really for you. This is about, getting experts in front of our subcommittee at times that work for you all on topics that you're interested in carving out additional times from your busy schedules for. So, I want to hear from what you want out of this.
What do folks think? Again, noting most of this probably needs to happen in June because July you're going to have your hands full with your direct work, and it's probably going to be hard to squeeze in presentations come July. Again, after that, you certainly can. Judy, just turn to you for a second. Does 11th of June look potential for you to be able to do something on TEK?
Yes, it's fine.
Awesome. And do those three topics, kind of Vermont conservation design, UVM climate assessment resilience work, and the soil carbon soil health baseline, do those three things look like the good topics for June? And Alyssa, since you're on there, I want to speak to whether you can do it or not as well. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, no, I think that timeline is fine. I think if it was possible to push it another week out, we might have more direct data. We're collecting a lot of information on soil health baselines in farms across Vermont right now. And I think that we'll get the bulk density data kind of at the end of June. So I'll have certainly helpful information. And that's fine. I don't want to put Jake on the spot, but I'm going to put Jake on the spot. I wonder if we can fit in a little bit about farm to plate. There's just so much information and perspective that you can bring. And I think every time you talk about how this fits into the food system and farm viability, it's really helpful. And I know that not everyone has time to read through all the briefs that your team synthesized for this date, but if there are even if you talked for like 15 minutes or something about what you think some key takeaways are, I feel like our group could benefit from that.
Jake.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. And for me, it's Alyssa, because there is a lot of different directions that I could go with it. If there's any kind of guiding questions or just a general kind of overview of like the plan that I could provide, I'm definitely more than happy to do that. Just more sort of directing questions that I can have. I can definitely point out certain things that maybe people are interested in.
And Alyssa, a question to that, then I'll go to David and then to Ryan. I know that Ellen gave a presentation to the Future of Ag Commission, and she was able to kind of cover the whole strategic plan, very broadly in like maybe 15, 20 minutes. Are you looking for something like that? Or are you looking for something much more pointed and detailed, directed at the work of this group?
Not knowing where everyone else is in their familiarity with the plan, I think that kind of overview could be helpful to more people, even beyond our subcommittee. But I think adding to that or asking Jake or Ellen to talk about what key pieces from the big picture are relevant to the long-term visioning for the food system, and if there are places where it clearly overlaps with the work and the long-term planning that's happening here, it just seems like a good opportunity. And also a ton of work. So sorry, Jake, for
no, it's not. No, it's not. It's not. It honestly isn't, because so basically we have like a stock presentation, which Patrick, you saw Ellen give, and I've given that to other groups as well. And then I can, and Alyssa, to your point, I can then tailor sort of the stock to point out some key areas of kind of overlap, interconnection between our plan and this planning process. I think fairly easily.
I see Ryan has his hand up, but just before you go, I think this is a great topic. I think there's some overlap with some of the kind of farm and forest viability work that we might want to hear from folks on. So we could either try to do this, we could add Jake in this topic to your presentation, or we could just do it at a subsequent week. So, this is an important one that we may not want to give short shrift to. So just you all think about whether you want to do it together or as separate presentations. We've got plenty of time through the summer to hear from folks.
I think that's good. I've got David Mears had his hand up, then I've got Ryan has his hand up. So David.
Yeah, well, first, just following up on the farm to plate piece, it goes to this question that I feel pretty strongly we should be talking about keeping farms as farms and keeping forests as forests, which goes because the majority of the farmland and forest land at threat of conversion to development is in private ownership. Farm viability and forest sector viability is a really key topic. And so I strongly support having, Jake, if you're willing to try to think about the recommendations out of farm to plate that may not on their face deal with climate, but really go to what are the threats to farming and keeping land and farm status in this state, and how do we help counteract that? And then the second thing I wanted to flag was really just a double thumbs up for conservation design, doing that early in the June conversation, so June 11th, if that's possible. I would love to have that roll out. And I put in the chat a report that Audubon just put out about natural climate solutions, and I'm going to share that with Eric Sorensen and the team of Fish and Wildlife in hopes that it's, if nothing else, it supports the basic premise of conservation design.
Great, thanks, David. Ryan.
Thanks. Just a generic comment in support of presentations from these various organizations to this group. New members may not have gotten kind of the walkthrough that was shared in the full climate council when that was getting going in December and January. And so I think a bit of background sharing and learning to understand how different sectors or I guess sectors approach and look at solutions in science in this space would be very useful, at least for me to be refamiliarized with or exposed to. So definitely would support us. Whatever the group feels is most efficacious, whether it's part of these meetings in June or we set aside extra time as needed, I think it would be very valuable to do so.
Maybe related to that, Ryan, is that, so I think what we've been suggesting is to again, in June, we have a little bit more time in your meetings, but these are pretty full as they are. So we have got some presentations early on here, but we were thinking, and this is a lot of meeting time, is kind of noon webinars where you can join if you can, that can be recorded. And we can also invite other subcommittees who might be interested too, like rural resilience or even the PS working group related to different on, say, soil carbon and soil health. So one thought is to do a little bit of some in these meetings and some kind of lunchtime webinars, which we can record so you don't have to show up in person. Does that sound okay, or does that feel like too much, or would you suggest a different approach? Silence is there.
I wonder if trying to build that into this meeting time on Fridays between 10 and noon is useful, so we can have a discussion and ensure that we're at least all planning to be here. Schedules are tight. Definitely think webinars are useful, but I think there could be a lot of good information that would be useful to dig into and digest and discuss perhaps as a group as well.
And the downside of having them like at lunch or webinars, a lot of people may not be there, and the people don't have the same foundation. So Ryan, I think you're advocating for maybe do it in meetings. Other views on that?
I think that's fine. It's just going to push them out further. But if people are okay with that, that's fine.
Jake, you were going to say?
Yeah, I'm curious as to sort of how this ultimately works into our strategy development. And presumably these presentations are meant to inform kind of that process. So yeah, just to Ryan's point, it feels like there's a lot of elements to these presentations that are informing our conversations about our strategies and recommendations. And I just don't know then the immediacy of like having certain presentations at certain points in time. But yeah, I would rather, just from my standpoint, would rather kind of use the existing time that we've already scheduled for this type of thing and make it a part of our work as much as possible.
Bill, do you have any questions about kind of implementing this? I think people are saying in meetings is probably better. We maybe can't do it all. We've got a number of things here. We wanted to add kind of the farm to plate. Really, any questions as you try to organize this?
Yeah, I think we'll just need to do a little work looking at the work plan that you just shared with us, Pat, understanding that we've got some kind of short term. We're going to need to use these meetings to do some of that work between now and the end of July. So I think we can come back with something next time that tries to integrate these topics in the course of these meetings. We generally do have a block to focus on something. but it's going to push some of these topics later out into the summer. So that's just the only reality of it. But if folks are good with that generally, I think we can make that work. I think if this sort of general prioritization around, TK, equity and just transitions, Vermont conservation design, and, I'd like to hear from folks if they'd rather hear from the UVM folks after that, or focus on some of these soil and agricultural topics. That would be some good feedback. But otherwise, I think we can figure out how to work this into our regular meetings.
Great. Any quick reactions on order of topics people want to share? Otherwise, we'll probably depend on who's available when and squeezing stuff in. But any thoughts on sequence here?
What Billy laid out sounds great, and I would just add that from my perspective, the Farm to Play strategic plan has a lot of relevance to what the task group 5E is working on. So we're actually using the plan as a foundation for a lot of recommendations that we're offering. So I don't know if it makes sense to sort of use that as a way to help inform why 5E is sort of proposing the recommendations it is by providing the foundation of the plan itself to everyone as a presentation to that.
Billy, I mean, it seems like one principle might be anything that might actually help the group advance its recommendations specifically in the next few months. Maybe it should go earlier, and stuff that's really great information and learning, but maybe doesn't as much affect our initial cut of recommendations. Maybe we could go a little bit later. If that even helps.
Sure. My challenge is that I think all of these things, affect the recommendations coming out of different task groups. So I think everything that we have at least listed as part of regular meeting will have a direct bearing on what comes out of task group. So the other option is if a task group wants to just take the presentation at their level and think that's helpful, we could do that. But I think we've heard clear that this is appropriate for the whole group to hear. So, I think working from the assumptions that these items are roughly in the right priority, that we want to hear them at our regular meetings. With that input, I think, we can work between now and next Friday to try to come up with a schedule and present it back to folks. And we'll just start knowing that Judy will build some time for you on our next meeting for your presentation on TEK, and we can work directly on how much time you need and all that. So we get that baked into the agenda for next week.
I think I just want to note in the chat, John offered, so let's just test whether you all are willing at least some of the time to start your meetings at 9:30 versus 10, which I know you're already giving a lot of time, but John put in the chat, so I'll just run with it. I don't know how people feel about, give you another half hour to, again, squeeze in a presentation and continue to kind of dive into the work. I don't know how you all feel about that. You can either say verbally or you can put in chat, yay, hell no, whatever it might be. I'm seeing some thumbs up.
Pat, we're missing a couple key people.
So maybe
Lauren and Abby aren't here, and so we want to make sure it's okay with them. But
good point. Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up. So John, people are taking you up on your offer. Anybody doesn't like it, definitely say, and we can reach out to Abby. I know she's got really busy farming right now, so that may or may not interfere with her work, but we'll ask. So, okay, great. All right, Iris, great. Okay. All right, David, that's going to be a little bit harder for David just to know. So I appreciate people's kind of frankness about that. So I think, Billy, for you and Abby to talk about, and maybe you don't have to do it every meeting. Maybe you just do it some meetings, partly to David's point about his schedule. All right, I'm going to turn this, Billy, back over to you. Sounds like I'll get you, Billy, a work plan and then work through the presentation, and I'll get that to you later today.
Great. Thanks, Pat. Thanks, everyone. Pieces are falling together slowly but surely. All right, what's next on our agenda? Okay, so we're got about a half an hour left in our meeting. Got a few other agenda items, but we've got about 10-15 minutes right now for kind of some unstructured conversation. I know David brought up some topics earlier. I had floated the idea of whether we want to come up with kind of a vision or a metric of what we're trying to accomplish in our work at the subcommittee or task group level. Pat, I'd invite you to kind of participate in this conversation. If he's gone, I think. Okay. So I don't know, David, if you want to kind of kick off your thinking, or if anyone else has items they want to bring to this group, we've got about 10 minutes to discuss.
It's kind of a question with a recommendation. And the question is, do we want to have recommendations? And I'm particularly thinking about the two task groups that I'm on, but there may be other task groups that have this similar question. Do we want to include a set of recommendations under the category of farm viability and forest sector viability? My look at the data and information and what I've learned over the years is that the majority of land and farms and forests in the state that's at risk of conversion to development is privately owned. And in order to keep it out of development, then we have to help keep it in viable economic status for the owners. And there's a whole set of strategies relating to that are much more about economics. They might be tax relief, they might be access to capital, it might be state help with marketing and so forth. And I don't know that we need to get into the weeds and deep details on it, but it does feel to me like we should offer both data that shows how important keeping land in productive agriculture and how important it is to keep land in productive forestry is to our overall climate goals, and then have at least some level of recommendations about how to do that. So that's my pitch. But I recognize it's a little bit outside of the wheelhouse of the staff that are supporting us and of the Agency of Natural Resources. And I may be out of the wheelhouse of some of us on this call. So I don't want to be putting forward recommendations that we can't really support with our expertise. At the same time, it feels like if we don't put that in there, we're missing one of the fundamental points that our particular subcommittee should be making.
Thanks, David. Thoughts on that? I personally feel like that piece is critical to our work, and that, amongst our staff, the members of the subcommittee and our partners that I know are eager to support us, we can certainly get the data to support those recommendations, but would be good to hear from others. Brian?
Thanks, Billy. I'll be putting into the chat a report folks may be familiar with, so apologies if it's a duplicate. American Farmland Trust has put out a New England version of their Farms Under Threat, and it provides some documentation and prospective thoughts on that land use conversion to high density or low density development. And that could be a useful starting place to look at what's been converted, I believe, over the past 2 decades, and some forecasts they have for Vermont and other New England states are in there as well. So that could be a resource to look at.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on David's observation question?
I don't know if this is a direct response. So, but in a previous meeting, I made a comment about, kind of this notion of sort of demand side policies and sort of supply side policies. And, you can look at it in the carrot and stick sort of traditional nomenclature of policy work. But yeah, I mean, I think, a lot of times we can look at things from kind of creating a demand for emissions reduction. But of course, then it's the question of, how do you supply that? And likewise, I think in terms of keeping land in ag or land in forests, there's kind of, well, how do you keep that supply? And that's where I think the economics sort of figures into this equation. And so just, yeah, I think kind of if we're proposing regulatory measures, we should also look at, the supports, incentives, financial or technical assistance or otherwise that are going to enhance the provision of those things. And so it's maybe more of a yeah, whether it's an explicit column or category or just discipline for us as we kind of look through our strategies and recommendations to find those complementary kind of pieces and elements. And of course, yeah, I think the economics is unavoidable about this of, how do we create a sustainable economy that works within this era of climate change and within the constraints of this legislation, or the confines of this legislation.
Ryan, is that a new hand up?
Yeah, it is a new hand. Wanted to also share that this is a kind of central focus point of the Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group, specifically looking at that question that was raised, farm profitability, and the challenges that exist when development pressures in an area outweigh the potential earnings of a farm for several generations, and some of the thoughts about quantifying and incentivizing additional management by farmers that provide an ecosystem service benefit for this group that we're in, this subcommittee, and focusing on climate primarily, but acknowledging all the other co-benefits that are there, some compelling economic reasons, and also broader goals could be achieved through looking at a system like that, a payment for ecosystem services, to derive the farms being able to stay as farms and all the associated forest land and natural lands that also goes along with those properties as well. So another group is definitely digging into this. No answers to share, but definitely a priority that's been articulated by many farmers and other organizations that are trying to work in this space. And so that could be a recommendation or a lens or framework to try to look at that question. David.
Anyone else?
Billy, yes, I agree very much with David's point. I think, having worked, as a sideline in conservation for at least 2 decades, I think this is very important. I think we're lucky that we're in a state that has a high degree of conserved land, and conserved with the idea it stay working. I'm sure that we're not going to have every I dotted and T crossed by December 1st. We're going to have a lot of things that at least that's my thinking. We're going to have a lot of things that we're going to say we need to do, that need to be done, and are going to take time to catch up as they're instituted and planned. I mean, just the sheer delivery of information, technical assistance to farmers, regulatory assistance to farmers, probably needs some review and tightening up and etc. And I think that's a lot of these kind of secondary, if that's what I'll classify them as right now, they're going to take time to catch up. But I think we can have an overall plan, overall goals, and just systems to make sure all these other pieces move in the right direction and catch up before 2050.
Thanks, John. Agree completely. So we just got a couple more minutes in this conversation. So I just wanted to kind of chime in, and this dovetails well with what I was thinking. I think we heard from Jane that there's a desire to get kind of high level recommendations out of our subcommittee. There's also a desire amongst us and a clear need to drive those down into more granular frames. There's these kind of intermediary goals, I think, that David has articulated, of using economic drivers to achieve those top line objectives that will have their own set of specific recommendations below them. There's other kind of middle tier objectives and goals. So I think what I was suggesting earlier is that our task groups come up with some sort of like a vision statement, which I don't really care for that word, but something of some more of a concrete objective to put some parameters around what we're actually trying to accomplish. Like as David said, like maintain X or increase by Y the forested landscape. And I think the conversation we're having right now fits very well into that context. So maybe a next step for this conversation is for the task groups to spend some time kind of mapping out what that kind of those top line objectives are of their work, those kind of secondary overarching strategies, and putting some numbers or some more explicit goals around what are trying to accomplish therein. And that might pull all these different threads together in a pretty effective way. So just curious if folks have thoughts on that as a framework for moving forward. Or is it just a bunch of bureaucratic mumbo jumbo? All right, David says thumbs up. So, okay.
Yeah.
Good. So, okay. So let's, I think in thinking about our agenda for next time, clearly we're going to have a good block of time to work with Judy on TEK, and I'll speak with her afterwards to see how much of the meeting we want to dedicate to that. But either in our kind of task group report outs or maybe in a separate agenda item, if we have time, we can come back to this conversation and see if the task groups have made some progress in fleshing out those different levels of focus with some ascribed metrics or goals attached to them. Cool. All right. Anything else folks want to bring up before we move on? Okay, seeing nothing. So next, sorry, I got a lot of screens open here. The next agenda item is, okay, agenda for next time. So I just took a quick look at Pat's work plan. I don't think there's anything for the full subcommittee on that work plan to discuss next week. I think we're going to want to have a conversation with Judy around TEK, build some time to talk about the cascade of kind of detail and granularity of our recommendations and how we want to ascribe certain metrics or goals associated with those coming out of the task groups. Other than that, are there topics that folks would like to specifically put on the agenda next week if we have time? Okay, and we'll probably want a little bit of time just to kind of finalize the, loop back one more time through the work plan, through the schedule for presentations that we discussed, and get some feedback on those. But we'll try to get that material out to you in advance, so those can hopefully be quick conversations. Okay, so at this point, the last official agenda item is public comment. We've got a few minutes until we need to jump there. So anything else the subcommittee or staff want to bring up right now before we move on? Okay. Gonna take an extra pause for the introverts amongst you. I was reminded to do that recently. Okay. Anyone in any members of the public participating today who are interested in sharing comments, thoughts, questions at this time, please raise your hand through Zoom. And if you're not able to do that, just make yourself known otherwise. Okay, so far I've got Gordon, Virginia, and Zach. Anyone else interested in sharing comments at this time? Okay, great. Well, if each of you could take a couple of minutes and share your thoughts with the subcommittee, I think we'll go Gordon, Virginia, Zach in that order, if that's okay with folks. Okay, Gordon, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much. Just wanted to highlight the written comments. Sorry, first off, Gordon with the Conservation Law Foundation. Just wanted to highlight the written comments that we submitted yesterday, specifically looking at the agriculture sector. We submitted them via the public portal as well as the partner Vermont email addresses. And if you have any questions or anything like that regarding those agricultural ones, I would love to hear them and have that discussion. But yeah, that's all I had.
Thanks, Gordon, for sharing those thorough recommendations with us and for reminding the group of them now. Virginia, please.
Hi there. Thanks for taking public comment. I've been looking in on these meetings for the Richmond Planning Commission and our Climate Action Group in Richmond. And I would first of all like to just support the recommendation that we have specific, lots of specificity in the strategies that you present, not just platitudes. We're really, a lot of the climate activists are expecting some, very granular details on the strategies that we're hoping to put forth. So I would support that, as well as articulating a higher level goal. So I think both of those things can work together, and I would encourage you to do that. The other point that I wanted to make was that in looking in on a cross-sector mitigation meeting the other day, there seemed to be some confusion as to whether they were looking to get input from the other subcommittees to do their work, or whether their work was supposed to be input into the other subcommittees to do the work. So I was just wondering if you had a comment about that as regards to your work. Are you waiting for them for something, for them to present strategies, or are they supposed to be taking your strategies and developing some kind of feasibility model for them? So just interested to hear what your comments would be about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Virginia. I can, respond briefly and probably incompletely. I think this subcommittee, our main interface with cross-sector is around ag sector emissions reductions. And I believe there has been ongoing conversations between the cross-sector group and the folks on our group working on ag emissions. And I believe at some point, cross-sector is going to present a target of emissions reductions to us to help focus the strategies that are recommended to achieve that target. Beyond that, we have this group has offered to play a role in other land use planning decisions that may impact the other subcommittees, like rural resilience and issues related to the siting of, say, renewable energy generation that might be recommended through cross-sector. So we haven't nailed down exactly what that looks like. I don't think that sort of interaction needs to happen by our initial deadline when people are just surfacing general concepts and recommendations, but it's certainly work we'll do over the course of the summer and fall across and amongst the groups. So hopefully that helps. Probably not a great answer, but it's what I'm thinking. Okay. And I don't know if anyone else on the subcommittee has other thoughts they'd like to share. Okay, thank you, Virginia.
Yeah, thanks.
Zach, a few more minutes for you.
Thanks, Billy. And just going to apologize if you hear sounds of nature in the background. I am sitting next to the shore of the lake today, Lake Champlain, and I am the Lake Champlain Lake Keeper at Conservation Law Foundation. It's good to be talking to you all, and wanted to just go back to the list of potential speakers that you all are considering for the next month and beyond. At the last meeting, I had proposed, and I think another commenter did as well, that this committee consider inviting who is easily, one of the world's leading experts, not just New England's leading experts on natural carbon storage. And that's Bill Muma, who's at Tufts and the Woodwell Climate Research Center. He's offered to come speak to this committee, and I hope you'll all take him up on that offer. He is really more knowledgeable than just about anyone on those topics. And when I looked at the list of themes that the committee is going to be hearing from people about, it's great to see the interest in maintaining the extent or expanding the extent of our forests, farms as well. But I'm concerned that, perhaps there isn't a speaker who's on tap right now who's really going to focus in on the quality of management, especially with regards to forests and wetlands. Recent studies at Harvard Forest and elsewhere show that in New England, it's actually the way that we manage our forests, not the extent of them per se, that has the greatest impact on the kind of carbon budget of our forests in this region. And so it's critical that we don't just look at the land area of our forest, for example, but the harvest frequency, the intensity, the methods by which we manage. So I encourage this group to invite Bill in and hear about some of this really exciting recent research showing the amazing role that Vermont's forests can play in storing carbon and mitigating climate change. So happy to help put the committee in touch with them if that would be of use to you all, but yeah, would appreciate your consideration of Bill Muma, or at the very least somebody similar. But again, Bill's offered, so I hope you'll take him up on it. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Zach. Appreciate the reminder. I think, certainly that topic of, forest management and how that relates to carbon is something that we should add to our list. So I'll put it on there and we can work with the subcommittee to figure out how best to bring folks forward for that discussion. So thank you for that reminder.
And I'll just, and Billy, in case I didn't say this, I want to emphasize wetlands as well. And so not just forests, but wetlands, and, both of which are, exceptional at storing carbon, and Bill could speak to both very well. He's got recently published papers on both topics.
Great, thank you. Okay, any other members of the public interested in sharing comments with the time we have left today? Okay, well, thanks everyone. We really pack a lot into these meetings. It can be a lot, but I appreciate your all the good work and thoughts and ideas you bring to the conversation and your patience. And I will work with Abby and Jane and Pat to try to get a proposed agenda and supporting materials out to you all sooner. Judy, maybe if you have a second just to stay on the call at the end here after we stop the formal meeting, just for you and I to talk about the best way to connect about your presentation next week, that would be great. And then otherwise, I think we're ready to adjourn. Everyone good? All right, enjoy the heat out there, everybody. Thanks again. How do I stop recording?
Thanks, Billy.